Welcome. My name is Devon Arthurson and I teach at Rikkyo University. I'll be sharing my presentation of students' opinions about peer teaching. We have an overview. We'll look at the literature review, objective, design and preparation, procedure, methodology, students' reflection and perspectives, instructors' reflections and new perspectives and potential applications. Literature about peer teaching says peer teaching can increase students' knowledge of the content being taught, in addition to promoting learner autonomy. It's coming from Benson, 2011. According to a study done at Kyoto University, it would appear that peer teaching is an effective means of student-centered, socially constructed instruction for the foreign language classroom, coming from Bradford Watts, 2011. And a peer teaching study of English education students at an Indonesian university found that the benefits were increased learning, greater confidence, and more peer interaction. That's coming from Sonoguniwati, 2018. The objective of this study in EFL and ESL, more literature about peer review exists in peer teaching. From the previous literature we just looked at, it does affirm the activity of peer teaching as a positive one, but does seem to be lacking in unification in data, particularly in regards to student voices. This research project aimed to present students' opinions about the peer teaching experience, share their feedback, and to provide their advice to other students who peer teach in a future class. Furthermore, for the past 10 years, I've been using components of the complete activity you'll see shortly, but I've never formally gathered data from students specifically to what they perceived as the benefits of peer teaching. Design and preparation of the project for 2 university classes. Students were required to work in groups of 2 to 4 to teach their classmates for one lesson as a midterm project. Both classes had 2 lessons per week during the 14-week fall 2019 to 2020 semester. Time was given for students to be accustomed to the lesson format and instructor style to act as a template. So that was probably, I think, from lesson 1 to 13. And students had discussions about their ideal lesson activities during one lesson. And in that following lesson, they were assigned their teaching groups and selected the topics they'd like to teach. And they spent 2 lessons planning their classes with instructor support. Each group peer taught a lesson, and both groups and learning groups were required to write reflections about the experience. The procedure. So from lesson 12, I think I made a mistake there. Lesson 1 to 11 is when they had the experience of understanding the template and the instructor style of teaching. So they were planning a lesson outline, which we'll look at later, as well as slides. And they were also required to find other teaching materials such as videos or articles, as well as data. And they got instructor feedback and advice during the lesson as they're planning, and they were required to submit the draft of their lesson outline. Then they were given their lesson outline and based with instructor feedback and asked to revise that, as well as continuing the planning process. And by the end of the lesson, they were expected to submit the outline and the slides so that I could set up their lessons and materials on the class's shared drive. Lesson 14 to 19, groups peer taught the lessons. And after the lessons, those who were not teaching were required to complete an entry in a reaction table in response to their classmates' lessons. And those who taught worked on their reflection papers. Lesson 20, the reflection paper about peer teaching was due. And in lesson 21, the reaction table to being peer taught was due. And a section of the reflection paper, which I'll show you shortly, was written in English, and that was the second part of the peer teaching assignment. And using these prompts, They were required to write in a paragraph the things they learned from peer teaching, ways the experience will help them in the future, advice they would give others about teaching, and the reasons it was a positive or negative experience. According to Deacon and Crocker, reflection can be useful in peer teaching. So that's why one of the reasons I wanted to include this activity. So we will look at these 4 things that helped shape the peer teaching activity. First, we have, let me restart my sharing. I apologize. Just one moment. Okay, let's look at, I hope everyone can see this, the lesson outline. So we were using a textbook, so they were given a unit from the textbook. Learning goals, they were expected to write down, and ways they would help their students achieve those goals. Materials, as I mentioned before, videos and articles or data, and how much time they would allocate for that, and some activities. Next, we'll look at the slides. So just let me stop for one moment. Okay, sorry about that. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, we'll see that there's a rubric, and the rubric is referring to the outline, which I just showed you, materials incorporated into the lesson, which we'll see shortly, as well as the activities. And I gave them a grade for group work. Were they equally participating as teachers? And these are just slides based on a template I had. I guess Arab Spring, social media and political issues was the focus of that lesson. So we can see that they're looking at the material in the textbook, doing some activities there. Discussion dictation. And they continue reading the textbook, and then they watch this video about Arab Spring, and the peer teaching class wanted them to discuss the video and then have to have a sharing time where they would share their comments with the class. This class also had a second video. Again, social media have the power to change the world, and another brief discussion. It followed by a fluency activity where one student would have to answer the 3 questions that you can see on the screen for 3 minutes, and then they would move to listen to share with another listener for 2 minutes, and then they would move again to share with another listener for 1 minute, just to see if they can improve their speaking fluency. And then they did a recap. And then homework was a student table. So I'll show you the student table. Just one moment here. Go back to this main screen. Okay, so the student table, that is not right. Just a moment. Okay, our student table is here. So if they were not being peer taught, they would write down who taught, information about who taught them, the date, the topic, interesting points presented in that lesson. And then I also want them to see what they liked about the group that was peer teaching, and maybe they would use similar techniques if they had not yet peer taught in their future lesson, or in other activities in other classes where they have to present or teach. What would they do based on the style of the peer taught class, any techniques the teachers had used. Lastly, the reaction paper. And you can see that they have a brief introduction, wanting them to write what they learned about the topic. I also wanted them to write about what they learned about the group work experience, just in case that wasn't a positive experience. Having a paper where they could share about that, I thought would be good. I might perceive that things had went smoothly in the lesson, but maybe that wasn't the case. However, with this activity, it always seems to be quite a positive group work experience where they're able to equally distribute the work and learn from one another. And lastly, the teaching. This is what you had seen on a previous slide. And these were the four prompts that I used to gather data and then to look for themes. So we'll be sharing that next, or I'll be sharing that next. Let's go into that slide again. Oh, and again, you can see the rubric for that. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the results. After looking at the data, we'll look at their responses. Things they learn from teaching skills, student engagement, communication skills, preparation, and continues down to group work activities and group work. Those are the themes. And let's look at what they said. The teaching activity was difficult for me. I had made many mistakes, things I regret. However, I think accepting my mistakes and practicing with confidence is a good way that will help me in the future. It's quite challenging for me to make students concentrate and enjoy the class. Their focus didn't last long, hence teachers are required to make students enjoy the class. We thought the atmosphere of the class was important, so we decided to play music related to the ocean that everyone knows. Consequently, the atmosphere was great and they focused on their work. And I think that group also had really nice, colorful slides. Ways that the experience will help me in the future. Again, we can see teaching skills, preparation, communication skills, presentation skills, and then ending with humor, calmness, and self-acceptance. And I'll refer to the next slide, which is their voices sharing the direct comments. Since I'm thinking to apply for a part-time job at a cram school, this experience will be helpful for me to keep in mind of how I can engage with students and create a fun, active, and motivational class. To make students focus on the lesson is most definitely the important aspect of teaching a class. However, after standing in the opposite position, it made me recognize how tough planning classes are as a teacher. I believe it will help me massively in the future. And from now on, I'll be able to have a new perspective. When I take classes, I'm able to think of the teacher's point of view. So I'm sorry. Advice you'd give about teaching. So again, we can see a theme of student engagement. It was really important from these students' perspective that a teacher is engaging students, they're motivating them, they're helping them to enjoy the class. We can see preparation, time management, communication skills, and group work were very important themes. Their comments based on this teaching experience will advise others to increase engagement with students and create an active learning class, because I believe motivation is the key for students to have a positive attitude to learn about new things. To make students focus on the lesson is definitely the most important aspect of teaching a class. What I would give others advice about teaching is that just prepare and practice. I recommend that when you're teaching, please have eye contact with your students and also increase your speaking volume. And I would like to give advice to students who are going to teach others not to be afraid. And this comes to our final prompt, reasons it was a negative or positive experience. 24 directly answered it was positive. Again, teaching skills, topic of knowledge, group work, empathy, communication skills were some of the main themes. And let's look at what they said. By experience teaching in front of the class today, I could realize how amazing and pleasurable it is when students react actively. The positive points that I can enjoy teaching because it's the first time to teach in English. I felt the teaching experience was positive and valuable because I became more interested in teaching others. And I learned that even though it's not easy to teach others, but I felt it's worth doing. Overall, I thought a student-led class was a positive experience because even though I always teach junior high school students as a part-time job, giving a lecture to university students was a totally different experience than I expected. In this way, I have come to consider that teachers have to be flexible with the way of teaching and the ages of students. Moreover, I could read the textbook more deeply than usual. I needed to speak clearly, for students to easily understand and grasp the concept. This experience will help me explain to others about something easily and understandably. It was a good experience because it was an opportunity to talk in front of everyone and think about what way is effective to understand topics. And this was for the students who did not directly answer if it's a negative or positive experience. However, it seemed that most did feel it was relatively positive, even though they didn't directly answer that. You can see from the next slide with their voices why I just mentioned that. What's not good about my lecture is that I'm nervous, my weak voice, and I should teach with confidence. What is good is dividing roles properly and proceeding to the plan. And we think out ways in the teaching first before the lecture. We make time for discussing because we want you, the students, being taught to talk freely without the lecturers thinking. Second, before watching the video, we will tell you about the discussion questions for understanding easily. I think I need to do my best both in the lesson and when working as a teacher. So based on what I just shared, I'd like to tell you about what I learned from reading their responses and analyzing, coding the data. Implementing an activity to gather students' perspectives through reflection provided more concrete confirmation about the benefits of peer teaching in relation to fostering learner autonomy, increasing confidence, and developing group work skills. So as we'd seen the beginning in the literature review, those similar themes came up, but I think it is always nice when what the literature says matches what a lot of the students perceive. It gave new insight into how students view the role as instructor, particularly motivating students and maintaining their interest. It also confirmed that though it can be a challenging activity, many students enjoyed the experience. So that really surprised me that even at the university level, students believed that the instructor was responsible for motivating them, for engaging them with the material. I did think they might feel that at that level, they were more responsible for having self-motivation, but it didn't seem that was the case. And I was also pleasantly surprised that many really had fun with the activity. It seems like it would be quite daunting to teach in a foreign language, your peers, but a lot of them really enjoyed it. And I think the students' recognition of the difficulty of teaching was comforting. Also, the various skills an instructor has and how they felt these skills could be transferred into different arenas was interesting. I'll just end with sharing about potential applications. So you could provide students with all the teaching material along with any answer keys, or you could have them teach a review lesson if it's challenging them to select materials or there's time restraints. So I think when I was teaching at high schools, I would sometimes have them teach a review lesson, have students teach only a segment of a lesson instead of the full lesson, or teach a partial lesson in preparation for teaching a full class. And I've done that before, have them teach in groups as a practice, and then for a final assignment, have them teach in pairs. That way they are really comfortable with what's expected of them and they have some confidence because they've done it before. And as an instructor, I think it's important that you should tell the students what your role is going to be. Are you just going to be an observer? Will you participate? Or will you be a helper, or maybe a combination of those roles? And by sharing this, I think you could reduce the possible anxiety that might exist for students who are peer teaching. And final advice, I think if you're role modeling, you have very well structured lessons and clear expectations for what they need to do, as well as a distribution of grades, where you could possibly, share the benefits of peer teaching that would make it meaningful for them. And just for distribution of grades, as you could see, I showed you many different segments of the activity. So that way all the grades didn't fall upon the peer teaching activity, but the planning, the performance, and then their reflections as teachers and learners. Here's our references. And I I just want to say thank you. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can email me, devonarthurson@rikkyo.ac.jp.